Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Sorry, my throat was a little dry. So I'm glad to be back after all the different events that were going on and the preaching schedule getting switched up a lot of times. We're now on a regular schedule. I'm no longer doing fifth Sundays at other churches, so I'll just be here. You'll just be seeing me. Valerie will be helping me with communion on the first Sunday, though, of each month. And so last time I was here, whenever that was, because I just can't remember. I can barely remember what I ate for breakfast this morning. We talked about how, despite all the suffering we deal with in our lives, that we always find victory in Jesus, no matter what. We're now going to look towards some of those tough situations that Israel had to witness to and wrestle with themselves as they dealt with all that suffering on their end before even the new covenant was around. And so we go to explore this a little bit in the first scripture reading today. It's from the minor prophet Nahum. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Never really got to read Nahum until recently, and it's a very interesting set of poems, prophetic poems about God's justice and victory. And so Nahum chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries and rages against his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power, and the Lord will by no means clear the guilty. His way is in whirlwind and storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry, and he dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither, and the bloom of Lebanon fades. The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt. The earth heaves before him, the world and all who live in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the heat of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and by him the rocks are broken in pieces. And so what is this talking about? Well, Nahum is prophesying about the downfall of Assyria. At the time, we were actually just going through 2 Kings today. At this time, Assyria was a brutal nation, attacking Israel nonstop, harassing and attacking all those surrounding nations as well. Constant injustice and suffering became the normal during this cycle in Israel's life in their following journey with God. Yet Nahum has these prophetic visions that God is going to take care of it. Now, I really wrestled with this scripture. I wrestle with any scripture that can come off harsh or more negative. And that's why I wish I had like the booming voice like Virgil has. Better than me. I really enjoyed the scripture reading this morning because I think it helps, at least help me get a little bit more focused on, that surrenderance and that humility that we need to have with God. And so the Assyrian nation, they find themselves after a while being defeated quite quickly by the Babylonians. But then you see the Babylonians take over, and now the cycle begins again. And then you look in Daniel, where they're now in another nation and trying to figure out how does one stay faithful to God but also live in a foreign country that you're not familiar with. And that exilic language is something that we can reflect on even in our common day lives as we try to remember that we're sort of exiles in this world working for God, and that the world is not what we're called to serve, but God only. And that's a difficult tension, because God calls us to love thy neighbor. He calls us to serve serve others, wash their feet, all kinds of things. But we also see in the Bible where there are a handful of times where Jesus does get angry, and that righteous judgment that we are so used to reading in the Old Testament that comes out of even Jesus, when he makes a whip of cords and goes to the temple to kick out all the money changers. And so one has to ask the question, what does righteous anger mean? Is it when I see injustice on the internet, or like from the news they're telling me about something awful happening on the news? Is that righteous anger? Really, I would argue that the only person capable of righteous anger is God, because, well, we don't have all the facts ever. We don't have the entire story straight ever. But God does. And so anytime we see suffering or evil, it's not that we're called to just stand by and do nothing, but we're first called to surrender it to God, because he's the only one that has everything straight. And that's what Nahum is talking about. He is proclaiming all these things that the Lord will exact justice. Because you don't just in this world get to do whatever you want and then get away with it. That's not how things work. Now some people do, because the world's not perfect, and then you have books like Ecclesiastes that addresses that, what he calls a mist or the vapor of life where things can get muddy. And it's like, why is justice not being executed here? Well, it's because the world's not perfect. It's broken. And so we see these examples of God where he does exact judgment. That nasty word that no one likes, wrath. And really, wrath is just this archaic word for just anger. It just means righteous and divine anger. Jesus Christ himself says that if you even have anger in your heart for your other man, you've already committed a sin. Not that you killed him. He said he's when he's preaching, he was saying, if you even have anger, that's not right. If you even look at someone else wrong, it's like this idea that he's setting up the law way higher when he's talking about these things at the Sermon on the Mount. And so we see people like Paul who they thought that he thought he was executing his righteous judgment, God's righteous judgment, by going and persecuting Christians, for example. He's like, I'm doing the Lord's work, and he's on his Paul's on a little personal crusade. But when he's convicted by the Holy Spirit, he's convicted that he realizes he has been fighting against his own God, our God, Yahweh, this entire time. All of a sudden you see his demeanor change, and it's like he's just a completely different person when you start reading all the different letters he wrote to people. For example, in Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 21, he says the following. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And so Paul is just piggybacking off of all the ideas that Jesus Christ talks about, that turning the other cheek, that walking the second mile. And one thing to iterate on those points is that those examples that Christ gives, where it seems like submissiveness to other people and just letting them do what they want, it's actually, you look into the cultural context and there's some actual positive protesting going on. When you just simply stand there and turn the other cheek, a backhand means that you're slapping a lesser person at that time, but they always slapped with the right hand, so if you turn the other cheek, they had to slap you as an equal. So you're saying what your description of me, that I'm a lesser to you is not correct, and I'm standing up to it, but I refuse to play your eye for an eye games. And so that's a form of nonviolent protest in a sense that you see Jesus Christ doing. Or going the second mile. What does this going the second mile mean? Well, in Rome's day, they literally had a law that said that soldiers could force anyone they wanted to walk a mile with their equipment and things. But if the apostles, for example, turned around and said, "No, I insist, let me help you all the way back to town," or something, people are going to see that and be reminded of the injustice, because it's like, well, wait a minute, they were only supposed to walk a mile. Now, it's not so much tricking them, right? It's just that you're saying, no, I'm going to do this of my own volition. I'm changing the narrative. You forced me, but I'm going to continue to do it because I can, and I will, because I'm called to love thy neighbor. And it makes people's brains hurt. And that's the point that Christ is trying to get across. He's trying to break cycles. He's trying to break the narrative that you fight fire with fire and you just punch each other in the face and that's it. Why are those narratives so strong? Those are the worldly narratives. Those are narratives made by the adversary. And so when you see God, when he does execute judgment in situations, it's always in particular situations, and it's always in the context of justice and perfect righteousness. Some of the stories are really hard to study and go through and be able to come out of that thinking there was love in that story, right? Some of the stories in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, are really hard to read and say there was love in that story at all. But it's like a parent, right? Now, I'm not saying parents go kill your kids, right? I'm not saying something horrible like that, but maybe we've said that phrase once or twice. I know something similar, right? It's like, you're going to get it, like, if you don't stop this. I mean, these different people are the different people that go and do the prophecies, give the prophecies of God. The prophets. I can't talk today. I was really struggling at Colfax this morning. They are kind of like those acting like parents on behalf of Israel in a sense. God the Father is our heavenly parent, and he has to correct us when we're wrong. We have to be humble enough to come to the altar and realize when we're wrong on whatever it is. I'm not picking a specific side on anything here. It's just the nature is that because we're human, there's invariably something that we're going to do that is not going to be on the side of Christ, even when we have the Holy Spirit in us. Now, is that a horrible thing to say? Maybe. Is that like, no, wait a minute, I have the Holy Spirit in me, I can do no wrong now. No, that's not how it works. I wish it was, because I'm a perfectionist. I really wish it was where everything I do is now going to be the right thing because I have Christ in me. What it really is about is that Christ has paid the atonement. Christ is the one that has paid for the perfect righteousness of God. Christ took it upon his own shoulders so we wouldn't have to face it. That's love. That's sacrifice. That willingness to go serve man and other people, to serve them, wash their feet, despite the fact you know they're going to throw you on a cross in 3 weeks, or however many weeks it was, and then say, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Where's the justice in that? Well, the price has been paid. And that's the thing that we get wrong about God's wrath. He's not some angry God that's coming and pointing at every little thing you're doing. But he will convict you. He will convict you of the things that you've done wrong in the past. But then, as soon as that happens, and you accept that, and you accept the Lord, all of a sudden your slate is clean. Because of grace. That slate is clean. It's been paid. We really, really take for granted the price that was paid by Christ. The payment of the atonement. We talk about it every day in church, but we really don't think about it. What did Christ really do for everyone? Eternal salvation, the defeat of death. He won over death. And that's a guarantee. That's justice. That is why he had that fire in him. Talk about going through the refining fire of the Holy Spirit, Pentecost, things like that. You don't think there might be a little bit of that, kind of fire and brimstone from God and some of those conviction things that you feel? It's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. It's like God's probably doing the little finger wag at you sometimes, but it's not like this, I'm bean counting. It's never bean counting. God doesn't bean count unless you haven't accepted the payment. And that's the whole thing. And we just really underestimate the payment of Christ sometimes. He died for all so that those who would believe in him would be saved. That is the beauty. And because of that, we find ourselves with that Holy Spirit, and people like John, writing in 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, says the following: Beloved, let us one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this love, not that we loved God, but he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. And so what does this phrase, no one has seen God, mean? In the Old Testament, there was this belief that if you saw God, you would surely die because you're this imperfect. Some language you read, like in Psalms, is like, I am just a worm, I am one, or whatever, right? There's this idea that we're unworthy of God's presence. So people really, until the new covenant came and God was able to build that bridge through Christ, there was this understanding that you could not be in direct presence of God. And so that's what is being said here. No one has ever seen him in the most literal sense. It's not saying that we don't experience God. No, his footsteps are everywhere. Those signs are everywhere. But some people have, now that this has all happened, right, this covenant, some people do experience those kind of profound moments. But normally the ones that have the most profound moments are because they had the most profound problems. For example, I grew up in the church, and I've never had this sort of, you could say, prophetic, really powerful experience of white light or something, or however people describe it, right? That's because I was always in church. Now, I screwed up, but my screw-ups were always, I guess you could say, in this sort of, it's like, whatever, kind of camp. I mean, I look at it and I cringe, right? The times that I was in college and not spending more time with God. I cringe when I wrestle with him and really question, where is your love in all of this suffering, Lord? Where's your justice in all this suffering in other countries and other places? And now I know none of all that was just in my head. That was all me. And that's what is being told here, is that you have to have faith. You have to have faith that in his time and in his way, he will make all things reconciled to him. All the suffering you see today, it will someday be reconciled through him. It will be dealt with. Now, it's not an ominous warning, it's good news. Sometimes we think about the end times or the eschatology of Jesus, as the smart people like to say, not me, as this doom and gloom and scary thing. And it's not. It's about the reconnection of heaven and earth, that everything will be reconciled back to God. From Eden we started, and back to Eden we go, is how it's understood. And that is the eternal hope. That is the blessed hope we have. Until we get that, we're going to be constantly in this gnashing of teeth and, wanting to put our fists up to each other over silly, contrarian things that I even find myself guilty of. Not saying I'm bad. I mean, there's just a lot of things that I'll look at something on the internet or the TV and I'm getting all red-faced about it. I'm like, I can't believe this is going on. It's like, we should know better as people. And then I look and I'm like, but yet I too am a sinner. And that is the conviction of Christ, is recognizing we're all on a level playing field. It's just a matter of not having accepted our position that God put us in. And that's the beauty of God's message of love. He's not giving up just because things seem bleak one day over another. He's not giving up over pettiness. We look at today's world and think, oh my gosh, Christianity hasn't suffered worse. But what about the apostles? Now, I'm not doing a whataboutism here. It's just, I was reading in a book the other day, and this is the closing point, about the brutal persecutions under Rome. Peter was crucified upside down, for example. Every apostle was crucified in some way or died a martyr. We are eternally blessed that we don't have to martyr ourselves in the literal sense in the USA. I've heard stories from people in other countries and what they have to do just to get the word out. In China, they have to have little paper snippets of just one single verses and pass them around like you're passing notes around in a class, but the situation's a lot more dire. And so we are propped up by these legendary giants of the faith that have built up our church. And when we get stuck in these squabbles, we're squandering all of the prophetic voices that came before us that are saying, go and preach the word. We are called to preach the word. Are we preaching the word? And are we living the word? That is what I want to leave this on. Are you following and living the word? And on that, let us pray. Lord, I thank you today for convicting me of my sin, reminding me that I too have faults, that I don't get to just sit on a pedestal and see where other people don't see things and act like I know better, because I don't. Like everyone else, I too have things that I need to work on. Pastors don't get a pass. Actually, pastors have to be above reproach, it says in Scripture, which is a very high, painful bar. But Lord, you remind us that through your love that you paid the ultimate atonement. So it's no longer about trying to move goalposts every time and having to improve continually in our lives. But that even in our decline and our suffering, that you are there in the midst of it all, whether we feel like it or not. What we say about you does not change who you are. You are eternal. You are life-giving. You are the truth and the light. And there's no one that can stop you from that. And we know that. We know through all these prophetic visions in the Bible that you will reconcile all things that seem so awful today will be solved in some way, somehow. Some people might say that's naive, but it's Scripture. And we need to humble ourselves to trust you again and let you do your work through us instead of getting in your way. Lord, I thank you for all of these blessings and everyone here today in our church and our charge, that we continue to do the work we're called to do through your church. I say these things in your name. Amen.
114 in the ground.
that Christ paid for all, so that we would have eternal life, for all the transgressions we've all done. Remember that. That is the good news, that regardless of anything you do, you are promised eternal life through Jesus Christ. May you have a blessed Sunday and rest of your week.
Amen.